Hey, and welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to continue on with the graphics widget. The method for this video comes from the Unreal University YouTube channel. I will leave a link to it down in the description. With that, let's get started. So we're going to hop right into the event graph, and then we're going to get started on the event construct. So from the event construct, we're going to drag off and then look for get game user settings. And then from the return value, drag off, and then we're gonna load settings. And then from the get game user settings return value, we're gonna drag off, and then we're gonna look for get overall scalability level. And then now we're gonna drag in all the integer variables that we created in the last video. Now I did go and change the naming. I just added the word index to each one of the integer values. So I'm just gonna drag them all in. Gonna hold Alt and then just drag them in. It doesn't really matter what order they are, just so long as they're all being set. So now we're going to connect the get overall scalability level to the set overall index, and then we're going to connect that. And then the next one we're going to look for is the view. So from the get game user settings return value, drag out, and then look for get view distance quality. And then what we're going to do is we are going to create a redirect node, and then just place this over here, connect it to the variable, and then from this redirect node we're gonna use that to then connect all the other ones as well. So from the redirect, gonna drag off, press period, then from the period we're gonna look for is vsync enabled, and then we're gonna connect that to the vsync variable, and then connect that, and then just move this a little bit, and then from the redirect, drag off period. Then from the period, we're going to drag off and then look for get shadow quality, connect that to the shadows index, connect the execution pin, move that out the way. From the redirect, drag off period to create another redirect, then drag off from the redirect. And we're going to get shading quality, connect that to the shading variable. We'll clean this up later. And then from the redirect, drag off period, drag off from the redirect, and then get reflections quality, connect that to the reflections, connect the execution pins, and then from the redirect again, drag off period, from the redirect, drag off, and then get global illumination quality, connect that to the variable, and then the last one, drag off from the period, from the redirect period, and drag off from the redirect, and then get anti-aliasing quality, connect that to the variable, and then connect everything up like that. We'll clean this up later. And then the last one we're going to do is the resolution. So from the redirect, we're going to drag off, and then we're going to look for get resolution, get screen resolution, and then we're going to select and right click on that, and then we're going to collapse this into a function, and then we're going to call this load screen resolution. I'm doing this because there is going to be quite a bit of code, and I would prefer it not to be all over the event graph, so I'm putting it in a function. And then I'm going to open up the function, and then in here I'm just going to rename the self2 to screen resolution. So from the get screen resolution, from the return value, we're going to drag off and then first promote this to a variable, and then this is going to be, I'm going to call this screen resolution. We are going to use this variable in a little bit, drop it into there, but for now we don't actually need it. We're just going to delete this, and then instead drag off from the get screen resolution, and then we're going to look for break into point, and then this is what we're going to actually use. We're going to use the x, and then we're going to drag off from the x, and then look for equal. So if the x is equal to 1280, we're going to look for a branch, and then we're going to connect the execution pin. And then if the x value for the screen resolution is equal to 1280, we're then going to set the resolution index to 0. So this is how we're going to set the resolution index whenever we open the widget, so that we can get the information displayed over to the player. And then we're going to repeat this a couple times over. So again, from the break in point, we're going to drag off in equals, and then the next one we're going to equal is 1536, and then we're going to look for another branch, connect the condition, connect the second branch to the false, and then we're going to select the set resolution index, control D, and then we're going to set the resolution index to 1, and then what we're going to do is, to save some time, we're going to select the equals, the branch, and the set, and then control D. So this one's going to be 2, and then control V to paste, and then this one is going to be 3, and then the last one is going to be 4. So now going back to the third branch, just connect this to the break-in point, or the equals, to the X, and then the value for the third equal is going to be 1920. The fourth one is going to be 2560, and then the last one is going to be 3840. So those are all the resolutions we're going to be looking for, and then just connect all of the branches to the false, and then that is it for how we're going to load in the screen resolution. Then we're going to compile and save. I'll come tidy this out later. And back to the event graph. So now we are done with the event construct. The next we're going to do is the buttons. The first one we're going to do is the overall quality. So the overall negative, we're also going to start with the negative, on click, overall positive, on click, and then we're going to drag in the overall index, hold control, drag it in, and then from there we're going to drag off, and then we're going to look for clamp integer, and then we're going to clamp it between 0 and 4, and then we're going to control D the clamp, and then the next thing we're going to do is we are going to drag in the overall index, hold alt, drag it in, then connect the clamp to the set, connect the execution pin, control D the variable, connect the other clamp to it, connect the execution pin, and then from either one of the set we're going to drag off and then look for get game user settings, connect the other variable as well to the get game user settings. Both of them need to be connected to it, and then from the get game user settings we're going to drag off and then look for set overall scalability level, and then we're going to take the overall index and then drag and drop that on the value. So as we go up and down the value or the integer index, so if you press this button here, which would make it so that the integer value becomes lower, it's going to switch to a lower level, and then as you press the other button which make it go higher, it will then switch over to a higher level. And then this code makes it so that as you cycle through, it will just change and change and change and change. Instead of having to select a different value manually, you just click the buttons and then it'll scale up or scale down. And then next thing we're going to do is from the get game user settings, return value, drag off, and then we're going to apply these settings and connect the execution, and then uncheck the check for command line overrides. And the next thing we're going to do is from the apply settings, we're going to drag off. Actually, no, I don't think it might work. So we're going to take the overall index variable, control D, and then from the variable we're going to drag off, and then we're going to look for switch on int, connect the execution pin, and then we're going to add 5 pins 0 through 4, and then what we're going to do is we are then going to set it so that whenever you scale up or scale down the overall index, it will then as well set all the other integer variables as well, so that the player will always know which level they are at. So you can't, so it's so that when the overall scalability is at low, then all the other ones also reflect that as well. So we're just going to drag them all in. Doesn't really matter what order they are. We are going to drag in everything except for the resolution. So we're going to start with the NT, and then we're going to drag in the global, except for the overall as well, the reflections, the shading, the shadows, not the VSync, and then the view distance. And then we're going to connect the execution pin. So 0, all of them are going to be 0. And then we're just going to select all the variables, press Q to make them all straight, and then we're going to select them all again, and then we're going to control D and then place that below, and then we're going to change all the values to 1, and then connect that to the 1, and then we're going to control V, connect the 2, set them all to 2, and then control V again, connect to 3, set them all to 3, and then final time control V, and then we're going to set them to 4, and then connect this to 4 as well. And then that will be it for the overall quality. And then the next one I'm going to do is the resolution. So down to where the resolution is, resolution negative, unclick, resolution positive, unclick. What we're going to do is we're going to take this piece of code here with the clamp and set. Just going to highlight that and then Control D and then connect the execution pins. And then we're just going to take the resolution index and then just drag and drop this over the variables and it will change to the resolution. And then we're going to take the resolution index, control, drag it in, and then we're going to do the same as what we did for the overall scalability, but we want to do this before we apply the settings. So we're going to drag off from the resolution index, and then we're going to look for switch on int, and then we're going to connect it to both of these set, and then we're going to add the pins 0 through 4, and then we're going to take the screen resolution, hold Alt, and then drag that in, and then on the pin, the blue input pin, we're going to split strut pin so we can get the X and Y, and then we are going to then set all the resolutions. So for 0, the resolution for X is going to be 1280 by 720. Then we're going to Control D. The next one is going to be 1536 by 864. Control V. Next one is 1920 by 1080. Control V. Next one is 2560 by 1440. Control V one last time, and then the last one is going to be 3840 by 2160. Those are going to be all the resolutions. Select all of it, Shift D to align them all, then connect all the execution pins, 0 to 1280, 1 to 1536, 2 to 1920, 3 to 2560, and then 4 to 3840. And then from here, now we're going to drag off from either one of the set, and then look for get game user settings, and then just make sure to connect all the set to it. Then from the return value, drag off and then set screen resolution, and then the resolution, we're going to drag in the screen resolution variable and then just drop it on the pin. And then from the get game user return value, and then we're going to drag off and then look for, and we're going to apply the resolution settings, not just apply settings, but the apply resolution settings. Then we're going to connect the execution pin, and then just as an extra precaution, we are then also going to do the apply settings. It's just an extra level because I'm not entirely sure if the apply resolution by itself does the job, but I do know that the apply settings works because it has worked for all the other ones as well. So that's it for the resolution. And then the next one, as I said, it doesn't really matter what order we do this in. So we're going to do the anti, negative on click, positive on click. And then what we can do is to save some time, because all the following code is all going to be the same except for the set. We're going to take the overall and then just copy everything, including the variables, and then Control D, and then just place everything, connect the execution pins, and then all we're going to do is just swap out the variables and as well as the set. So between the empty, just drag and drop this over the variables, and then by the get game user settings, just remove the set overall scalability, and then we're going to look for the set anti-aliasing quality, and then switch out the overall index, connect that to the set anti-aliasing, and then just connect the execution pin. And then this is going to be the same for every other one. You can do it the exact same way. Just do the on click, negative first, then positive, and then just copy the code, switch out all the variables, and then just switch out whichever set it is to match the appropriate variable. So I'm going to do that and then come back once I'm done and show you all the final result. Now I'm done with all the other ones. This is what the final result looks like. Just double check to make sure that all the buttons are aligned with the variables, are aligned with the set. Sometimes if we try to rush things, we could also make mistakes. So with everything done, now I'm going to do the vsync. For the vsync, negative, positive on click. Then I'm going to drag in the vsync, hold Alt, drag it in. So for the negative, we're gonna leave it as false, and then for the positive, we're gonna set it to true, and then just connect the execution pins, and then we're gonna look for drag off from either one, and then get game user settings, and then from the get game user settings, we're gonna drag off and then set vsync enabled, drag in the vsync, drop it on the pin, and then from the get game user settings return value, drag off and then apply settings, uncheck the check for command line override, and then that will be it for all the settings. We're gonna compile and save. So now we're gonna do the text blocks. So the text blocks are gonna be bindings. I'm gonna head over to the designer, and then on the overall, I'm gonna select the text block, and then in the content text, create binding, and then we're just gonna rename this to get overall, and just drag this out a bit. Then we're gonna drag in the overall integer, and then drag off and then switch on int, and then connect the execution pin, and then create more pins. What I'm going to do is from the return value on the return node, I'm going to drag off and then promote this to a variable, and then this will be called overall text, and then we're just going to drop this in the overall category, and then once you get overall text and then alt, drag it in. We're going to connect this. The first one is going to be low, take the set, control D. The next one is mid, control V. The next one is high, control V. The next one is epic, and then the last one, control V, is ultra. And then just make sure to connect all the variables to the appropriate pins, and then connect all of them to the return node, and then that is how it's going to look. And then we're going to move on to the next one. So back to the designer, then we're going to go for the resolution, create binding in the text content, and then just rename the function get screen resolution, and then we're going to drag it out, and then we're going to drag in the resolution. So the screen resolution, hold control, drag it in, and then we're going to drag off, and then we're going to break it, and then we're going to look for an append string, and then we're going to add a pin, and then the middle pin we're going to make it an X, and then we're going to take the from the break in point, the X, we're going to drop it in the A, and then we're going to take the Y and then drop that in the C, and then we're going to connect the return value to the return value, the return node, and then that will be it for the resolution. And then we're going to compile and then move on to the next one. But first we're going to go over to the get overall, and then we're going to copy the code. We're going to copy all of this, then control C, add to the designer, the anti-aliasing, text block, content text, create binding, and then we're just going to rename the function again. Just drag this out, then from the return value, drag off and then promote to a variable. I'm going to call this one, this is the anti, let's call it anti text, and then move it to the category, and then just select from random space, control V, connect the execution pins, and then just swap out the variable at the beginning for the appropriate one, which is the anti, and just drag and drop that. And then one thing to note about text variables in particular, they don't work the same as the other one. So even if you say, for example, you take the anti text and you drag and drop it over the set overall text, you're going to end up with this, which shows you there's an error. And it's not a big problem. You just have the node is selected, right click, and then just refresh nodes, and then the problem will be solved. So yet again here we're going with low, and then we're just gonna just do all of this, just drag and drop it for all of them. Can we mass select them? Refresh node, we can mass select. Okay, so you can just drag and drop them and then just mass select them and then refresh them all at once. And then the next one is mid, high, epic, and last one is ultra. So we're gonna do this for all the other variables as well. I'm gonna go do that and then come back and then show you the final result. Now I'm done with all the function, all the bindings. So this is what the screen resolution looks like, the overall, the anti, the global illumination, the reflections, shading, shadows, and then the view. And then the one we're going to do last is the vsync. So by the vsync, gonna create a binding, and then drag off, and then promote to variable. Rename this to vsync text, and then for the vsync, we're just gonna just put this in the category, and then for the vsync control, drag in the variable, and then drag off, and then look for a branch, and then we're gonna set the text. We only need true, so if it's true, we're gonna set the vsync as on, and then if it's false, we set it as off, and then that's it for the vsync, and then just connect both to the return node. And then we're gonna compile and save. And then something I forgot actually while doing all the code is in the event graph, for all of them, I did forget to add one crucial part. So just drag everything except for the vsync, and then just drag them out of it. And then what we need to add is for the negative, we need to drag off and then look for a subtract by 1, and then connect that to the clamp value. And then for the positive, drag off and look for an add, connect it to the clamp value, and then we're gonna add 1. I actually forgot to add this. This was a mistake on my part. If you don't add this, then you won't be able to either decrease or increase it. My bad on that one. Just going to add this to all the code. We can just select them and then Control D, and then just quickly do this. And then now that that part has been added, it should work fine. So if we compile and save and then just go and test it out, I'm gonna play the level. So here we are, gonna hit settings, and then okay, the resolution seems to be having a problem. It says 00, so we're just gonna change this. So as you can see, the resolution does indeed change as we change it. The epic, we change it, set to high, mid, and then we're gonna change them all individually as well. And then the using, we can set it to on or off. So then that is everything. Then if we head back and then go back into the settings, okay, so it remembers all of these, but for some reason the resolution isn't being called. Okay, I need to go and check that one out, but everything else works. If we switch between them, the appropriate one gets loaded. So I'm just gonna go check out what's up with the resolution and then come back with the solution. Okay, after looking around, I found out where the problem is. So the problem is in the load screen resolution. In here, we actually do need to set the screen resolution variable. So just drag this out and then drag in the screen resolution, hold Alt, drag it in, and then connect the execution pin, or not the execution pin, the blue pin. And then from the screen resolution set, we're then gonna connect that to the break in point, and then connect the execution pin. And then hopefully now it works as intended. So I'm gonna test it out again and go to settings, and then okay, now it's actually working because I left it on, let's see, if I leave it on 2560 1440 and then close this and then try again and then go to settings. Okay, so yeah, that was the problem yet again. My bad on that. I forgot about it. I actually took it out. I actually had it in and then I took it out because I thought it was wrong the first time. Apparently it was right the first time. So then with that, now we have everything working. Hey, this is a post-recording insert. So while I was messing around, I ended up making something that I thought I would add to this video as well. It's with regards to the overall scalability and the ability to set the text to custom. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the functions, create a new function. We're going to call this function check overall. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to the overall, drag in the overall index, control drag it in, and then we're going to drag off then equal. And then we're going to duplicate this a couple times, and then just connect all of these to the variable, and then set them top one 0, next one 1, 2, 3, 4. And then from either one of them, you can drag off and then look for or boolean. And then we're just gonna add the number of pins. I'm just gonna drag this one to the bottom, just so we keep the hierarchy and keep things clean. And then we're gonna drag off from the pin and then look for a branch from the or. make the execution pin. And then what we're going to do is, by default, we're going to drag off and then look for set overall text. And then we're going to set the overall text to custom. And then by the true, we're going to drag off and look for get game user settings, drag off from the value, and then get overall scalability level. And then we're going to drag off and then set overall index. And then we're going to connect it as such. And then we're going to compile and save. Then we're going to head over to the event graph. And then by the event tick, we're going to drag in the check overall. So this is going to check every frame to see if it matches, but we also need to go and add that piece of code to the get overall function that we added over there. So just open this, and then we need to take this piece of code along with the branch, Control C, head over to the get overall function, and then drag this out, drag it out a bit, and then Control V, and then paste this here, and then connect it up as such. Just make a little bit more space. And then what we're going to do is from the false yet again, we're going to drag off and then set overall text, and then we're going to connect that to the return node, and then we're going to set this one to custom. So the reason we're doing it like this is because the function here only runs when you change something. So only when you click on the overall buttons, then it will actually make a change to the text. But with it running on the event tick as well, it will then also check every frame. So in case you make any changes. So how that looks like would be just compile this, and then if you play the level, go to settings. Currently it's set to custom because I have made changes from the earlier portion of the video where I set all of these up as different. But if we actually press the buttons, they will change and the text will reflect accordingly. And then if you start making changes, then it switches over to custom because now it has recognized that you have made changes to any one of the other settings, and it's no longer an overall scalability of either 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. But if you say, for example, let's just quit here, head over to the event graph, and then disconnect this from the event tick, and then compile and save, and then play the level, go to settings, it still says custom. But once you start making changes, if you start making changes here, as you can tell, it has no longer changed the text on top. When it will change text is when you go back and then go back into the widget, then it will notify you that now you have a custom setup. So that's why we also connect it to the event text so that we can be notified in real time as we make changes that now we're using a custom overall scalability level. So I just want to bring that to the video because I forgot to add that in the actual video because I only did it after the recording to go and test out, see if there's anything else. Let's head back to the video. That brings us to the end of this video. And then in the next video, we are going to work on the audio widget. And then after the audio, we'll jump into the gameplay. And then lastly, we will finish off with the controls. But for now, we're done with the graphics. Everything works. We change the overall, go back, quit, and then go back in, go settings, everything loads in as intended. And until the next video.